This is your reality check.
What's up, cuboids? And welcome to The Reality Check, the Canadian show that explores a wide range of controversies and curiosities using science and critical thinking. It's just me, Adam, to set up the show today. We have a mashup about trees. First up is an interview we did with Owen Clarkin, who's a tree aficionado who gives us all kinds of fun tree facts. In that interview, we bring up a question about how much oxygen trees really produce, which was addressed in a segment Pat did years later about the Amazon being the lungs of the earth. So the interview is followed up with that segment. As a fun extra, the tree episode had included a TRC commercial by Elon, which was recorded for the 100th episode of Stuart Robbins' podcast. So I'll include that as an outtake at the end. Enjoy, and we'll be back with some newly recorded content real soon.
As I said before, our first segment will be me talking with Owen about the nature of trees. And to give you a bit of background, Owen, who are you and why do you know anything about trees?
So I grew up in a rural area and there wasn't much to do, not other kids or anything. So I just go outside and look at things that were taller than me. And there was a book on my shelf called Native Trees of Canada, and I just I decided basically to start identifying what I found and so on, and the rest is history.
All right.
I'm probably kind of weird, too.
The obsessive intellectual curiosity helps.
That's part of it, I think. Yeah, that's why I'm friends with all these guys.
Yeah. Now, Owen does have a doctorate in chemistry, but that's not related to his tree knowledge.
Not relevant whatsoever.
That's just, extra. It makes him a well-rounded person.
Sure.
So, Owen, how many dates into a relationship do you reveal the fact that you're obsessed with trees, normally?
Usually about the second or third year, I think.
Okay.
In honor of Adam, we would have edited out a wood joke that he would have made right now. So just wanted to put that out there. All right, so with trees, I thought this might be useful to talk about in general because we don't cover that much either botanical or biological stuff at that level of detail. So I'm just going to have a free-flowing conversation with Owen, and the other guys can chime in too and just ask him what he might know about certain things that I thought our listeners might find interesting. What's a tree?
A tree is a woody plant taller than a human typically. So, if we're talking about 2 to 3 meters and up. If it's shorter than that, it would be called a shrub.
A shrubbery? I was going to ask you, what's the difference between a shrubbery and a tree? And you're just saying it's just...
Is it taller than you when it's mature is the question.
That's true. Is a shrubbery ever mature? In the recent Ken Ham, Bill Nye debate, Bill Nye talked about really, really old trees being thousands of thousands of years old. So approximately how old is the oldest tree, and then how do we even know that?
The oldest tree is on the order of about 5,000, maybe 6,000 years old or so. There's been some recent work done on this. Maybe, the trees keep getting older in terms of the ones that are checked out, but the standard order of magnitude is about 5,000. And we know this by doing ring counts. There's a famous story of a grad student around 1970 or so who cut down a bristlecone pine in California to see how old it was. And by cutting it down, of course, it was killed. And the tree turned out to be the oldest known tree for several decades, which was, again, 5,000 or thereabouts.
So is that a true story?
That's a totally true story. And the way we know, of course, is by counting annual rings. Why do trees have annual rings? Well, they have a growing season where the wood expands and grows. And then when the dormant season, winter, comes along, they just sort of sit there and wait till the next growing season. So if you have a cross-section of a tree, you see an annual set of rings, which you can count.
And how do you get it without cutting it down?
Very good question. So we've advanced since cutting down the oldest tree. We have a tool called the incremental borer, which is basically just think of a drill bit that's hollow. And you aim for the center of the tree from the outside, and you take out about a pencil-sized core, and you get most of the rings that way. And if you hit dead center, you get all of them.
So it's kind of like taking ice cores, Owen?
Very similar, yes.
Right.
So how do the young Earth creationists respond when you say that the oldest tree is as old as you think the entire universe is? Or I guess they could just say that tree was in the Garden of Eden?
They would have one potential logical out of this, which is some trees will have multiple flushes of growth during the season. So let's say a tree grows in May to June and then sits for a while, and then it's been a good growing season, lots of rain. It decides, I'm going to grow again because, my resources are pretty good right now. I've gotten lots of food this summer. It might have a second flush in July or August, typically July. And then it might get a second ring, or at least a pseudo ring. And in principle, you could get an overestimate of the age on the tree this way.
And so a flush is just another term for a growth or a growth spurt?
Yeah, growth spurt.
In places like Canada, where there's an overt difference in seasons, I can sort of see the overt ring appearing. But in other parts of the world, it doesn't seem like there's that much of a seasonal difference. Is that then just due to, say, rainfall, or I don't know what?
Well, this is a great question. In the tropics, where you have no distinct seasons, it's my understanding that the ring counting approach doesn't really work that well because, as Darren suggests, trees, they're not going to be growing at the same rate all the time, but it might have much more to do with, did it rain recently, or was there a drought, which is kind of the same thing, or, has it been too hot lately, or, the tropics are typically fairly stable in terms of, heat and cold and precipitation. They don't really have seasons. So, my understanding is some trees don't even really have distinct rings down there, but I know less about the tropics than the temperate zone.
Because that's where we are.
Yeah.
Right. In talking to Owen about this, and I was sort of saying, well, okay, so 5,000 years, maybe 6, and even Bill Nye hinted one might be 9,000 years old. What would kill a tree? Like, if it has resources, because humans, we just sort of eventually die off because our system's failure on one way or another, but Owen was saying that's not necessarily the case with trees.
Exactly. So animals have definite lifespans, it seems. A person might live to 100 or 120 if they're really lucky, but then, systems do indeed fail, and cell division just can't keep going on forever due to various technicalities. But no mammal's going to live to 150. It would seem, no human mammal. So with trees are quite, and plants in general are quite a bit different. The perennial plants, such as shrubs and trees and vines, they're not programmed to die in any way. And if you leave a tree just to grow, it will typically grow for maybe 100, 200, 300 years or so if it's lucky. And some rare exceptions live, multiple centuries into the thousands, but this is not typical. Usually they just get big. They have to support more, more branches, more leaves. A branch might fall off in a windstorm and rot gets into the wood. They're competing with other plants is a big one. So let's say the young upstarts nearby haven't overextended themselves yet. It's a life and death struggle for resources and minerals and water and so on. So trees typically die from competition, from disease, from that sort of thing without a definite time where you could predict this would happen. But
it seems so peaceful out there.
It does.
Do you think we need some tree equity programs to make sure they're all being treated?
You've heard that Rush song, right?
There's unrest in the forest. There's trouble with the trees.
Exactly. Good Canadian song. So I mentioned to Darren the other night, too, there's another aspect to this, which is, let's say you keep a tree in a juvenile state. Oh, how does one do this? Well, if you cut it down every few decades and don't let other plants compete with it, such as happens in Europe with pollarding and coppicing, which is where you cut down either at ground level or a bit above, trees will basically stay in a juvenile state and just regrow every time you cut them. And if they don't get a disease, then they never really overextend themselves, and they're not going to lose the battle for competition with other plants. And they just basically keep going and going and going until maybe eventually a disease gets them, or a drought or so on. But they stay juvenile and they just keep living forever, essentially. They're basically immortal in that situation. That's what the texts say sometimes.
There can be only some trees. So, there's a lot of intentional language in there, but we don't think the trees are, trying overtly to use their height in certain ways to compete with their neighbors. But yes, evolutionarily, there is a competition for resources, and there's that line that if they could all just agree to stop at a certain height, then they could do something else with their energy. But of course, what else do trees want to do? It doesn't kind of make sense.
It's true, yeah. They just keep growing if they can. They have to keep growing, right? If they stop growing, there's no leaves next year.
And then they need the leaves for energy.
Yeah.
When I was growing up as a kid, I remember that trees don't get their water from their leaves, from the top. They get it from the ground and it goes all the way up. Something about xylem and phloem. So my question is it true that trees only get their water from the soil from their roots? Can any of it come through the leaves? And just, I guess they can take it all the way up? And how does that work? Like even hundreds of feet?
Yeah, so two questions there. So the first one is certainly they could get a bit of water through their leaves because there's basically trapdoor type cellular objects are called stomata, where you have guard cells that open and close depending, like a little door or window, depending on how dry or wet or windy or hot it is outside. And they open up when, when respiration is occurring and they're making energy and they're photosynthesizing. So when lots of things are happening in the leaf, the stomatas are typically open. So then water could go in, but we'd be talking about a very minor contribution. The vast majority would come through the roots. And then you get hydrostatic pressure by evaporation of water leaving the leaves to these stomata, which essentially pulls up water from the ground. And there's been a couple decades or so, maybe 1 decade, I think a little longer, there's been research on how tall can a tree get, because it has to get water from ground level to a certain height. And there's a surface, there's a tension to the water, which if it breaks, that conducting tissue, like let's say you get an air gap in let's call it an artery or whatever, analogous, going up the tree. If there's a break, then that conducting tissue basically dies. It becomes non-functional. You need a continuous column of water. So often when you get drought damage in a tree and the top of it dies or so on, it's because the water columns are often broken and it just can't reestablish them and it's gone. But when things are good, calculations by physicists have shown about 400 to 450 feet, I think, however many meters it is, about 120 meters or so, is about the maximum height of a tree that you would predict based on the various properties of surface tension of the water column and so on. And that corresponds very well to the tallest trees on Earth, which are typically pushing 400 feet or thereabouts.
Right. So about 40 stories.
Yeah.
So it really is, when you say water column, I picture a cylinder in the tree. Is that actually what's happening, or is it going to be more like this deviating, flowing line from top to bottom?
It's both. If it was one cylinder, the tree would be very susceptible to, just a little cut anywhere, and then it's a non-functioning column. So it's more almost like, in terms of electrical circuits, it is more like a parallel circuit than a serial one. But if you do cut around the tree, more than, halfway, you can get into big problems. The tree can get into big problems in terms of conducting water up or food down from the leaves.
Interesting. Another common belief I believe people have about trees is that they think it provides the oxygen for the earth, the lungs of the earth, people say. But I've also learned that actually a lot of the oceans are doing a lot of that, depending on the material in the ocean. So is it really the case that trees are providing that much oxygen on Earth?
Yeah, this is a sort of a complicated subject, but it's a great question to have because, the trees do provide a lot of oxygen for us to breathe, as do photosynthesizing organisms in the ocean. Now, okay, let's just go back in time. My understanding of geological history is such that we did have an oxygen-poor atmosphere before life was on Earth, and then at some point life started photosynthesizing and did release oxygen in the air, and this was an oxidizing atmosphere, which is very dangerous for things that don't like being attacked by oxygen. Oxygen is very reactive.
Yeah, the first life forms killed themselves for us. Basically,
right? So I think there's a lot of truth in saying that photosynthesizing plants, if you want to call them that, are responsible for the oxygen on Earth, roughly 20% of oxygen. If you cut all the trees down on Earth, would you choke, in a year from having no oxygen? I'm not so sure that would be true. I've never calculated it. But people can tolerate a much lower concentration of oxygen than the standard 21 or so percent. I've looked into this because of my chemistry background based on, let's say, the gas leak in the lab. And the number is exactly what they are escapes me somewhat, but you can lose a good quarter of the atmosphere and just get a headache or this sort of thing, of
yeah, well, I saw the movie Gravity, and she got very far down in oxygen. And
no, dude, we're just going to cut that, or you got to say spoiler.
It's fine. That movie's not about the plot; it's about the effects.
Dude, don't be that guy. You hate when other people spoil things.
All right, fine.
So, Owen, before leaving Ottawa, and since I've been in Toronto, so that's over the course of maybe the last 6, 7, maybe even 8 years, I've noticed something with maple trees that I had never noticed before, and that is either big black spots or big white spots. Do you have any idea what I'm talking about?
On the leaves?
So, do you know what it is? Yeah. On the leaves, yes.
So this is likely Norway maple. A lot of them are green, the normal kind, and then a lot of the other ones, it's the same species, but a cultivar, which would have purple leaves. My guess it's that species. It's very susceptible to a fungus called black spot fungus or black tar fungus or something like this, which comes out around August, September, just before the leaves fall.
Perfect.
And yeah, that sounds like what you got. It's a commonly planted tree, and it's a little more urban tolerant than the native sugar maple. So you find it a lot in the cities. It's one of the most common trees.
So is it destructive to the tree, or is it just a fungus?
It's both in a way. It is destructive to the tree, but because it strikes late in the season, we're talking the leaves are getting kind of old. They're more than halfway through their annual life, so to speak.
Right, of course.
The tree, if it's not competing in a life and death struggle with other forest plants, doesn't really care. Probably, it's no big deal.
It's very stoic about the whole thing.
Oh, take my leaves if you must. I don't care.
Take my leaves.
So, Owen, I was just curious, is it true that some trees produce fruit that when you eat them, they make you really smart? I read that in a book. There was a guy who ate a fruit, and it made him really smart.
Are you talking about the Bible, Eli?
Yes.
The citation needed.
It's true that if you eat food, you will get smarter as opposed to dying. So
It'll prevent you from being dumber or dead.
Yes. So in a relative sense, that is a true statement. We're going to have to wrap it up soon, but do you have any overarching thoughts about trees that you want to share with listeners, of things you think they should know or understand about it?
If you have a grassy lawn that looks kind of windswept by midsummer and so on, I would consider putting some perennial plants of some kind in there that are woody, just in terms of absorbing rainwater. And, there's a lot of studies showing that people, like their moods improve and so on if they just are around woods or even just, parkland kind of trees. So,
biophilia hypothesis.
Right. Yeah. I would certainly encourage people to, either just go out and enjoy trees on walks with the dog or what have you. But I mean, it can be one of those situations that, there's a lot to know about them, and learning how to tell them apart is also kind of one of those things that can be just sort of one of the infinite fun hobbies out there. And that's, it takes up a lot of my time, certainly. You
heard it on the reality check. Go and hug a tree.
Do it.
But don't get splinters. In terms of all the things that can die in beautiful ways, I think trees might be the winner.
Yeah, and I mean, how about this? If there's anything that polarizes people, is there anything that polarizes people more than trees? You have this one neighbor on one side who says, I hate trees. He moves in, he cuts them all down. And then, the person across the road says, oh, that criminal against nature. How dare you do that? And it seems people either love them or hate them often. And I've just, another little thought I'll throw out there. I've just noticed this.
Although racism also divides people.
It's basically those two things.
Is there anything more than
trees and racism?
Racism, nationalism, sexism,
yeah.
But yes,
love of cats.
There you go.
Cats. Oh, I love cats.
Who has the best videos, right? Well, thank you, Owen, for that illuminating discussion on the nature of trees.
That was great.
Thanks for having me. It was my pleasure to talk about it today.
Is the Amazon rainforest the lungs of the earth, Pat?
Right. So we got the following note from Checker Chris on Facebook. Hi there. I'm not sure if you've covered this. The Amazon is often referred to as the lungs of the planet. Is it really possible that the Amazon produces that much oxygen compared to other parts of the planet? So Adam touched on this a little bit last week when he looked into the fires currently burning in the Amazon and concluded that while this year's fires are pretty bad compared to the last few years, they are not unusual and not the worst in the last 15 years. Like last week, I'll stress that there are many good reasons to be concerned about fires in the Amazon rainforest, but also like last week, I want to look at what's true. So, celebrities and political leaders have spoken out. Madonna and Jaden Smith have shared photos on social media. Leonardo DiCaprio said, quote, "The lungs of the earth are in flames." Soccer star Cristiano Ronaldo tweeted, "The Amazon rainforest produces more than 20% of the world's oxygen." French President Emmanuel Macron tweeted, "The Amazon rainforest, the lungs which produce 20% of our planet's oxygen, is on fire." Candidate for the Democratic nomination for President of the United States, Kamala Harris tweeted, "The Amazon creates over 20% of the world's oxygen." But these weren't the only sources. ABC News said it. CNN said it. Business Insider had it as part of the headline on their story about it. But before we jump into that, a bit on the pictures that were shared with many of these social media posts.
Uh-oh.
Mother Jones and others did some fact-checking and found that many of the shared photos were from Other fires, including blazes in California and India, or were from previous years.
Wow, I'd heard the years, but I didn't know like other countries entirely is that's a bit alarming.
Mm-hmm. So, for example, the photo Macron tweeted, which was retweeted more than 40,000 times, was taken by Lauren McIntyre, who died in 2003.
No.
Yep. Many people tweeted and retweeted photos from 2014 and 2015. Also making the rounds with the hashtag Amazon Rainforest is a picture from 2013 of a fire at Brazil's Tame Ecological Station. A photo that was retweeted more than 4,000 times with the hashtag Pray for Amazonia is of a fire in Montana's Bitterroot National Forest from 2000. Kendall Jenner retweeted a split image to her more than 28 million followers with a message about how fires in the Amazon have been burning for 3 weeks. The left side of the image dates back to at least 2014 when it was used in articles about forest fires in Sweden. The right side depicts a fire in Siberia.
When people ask, why do we do the show? Right there. That's why.
It's not surprising to me that these photos get retweeted and shared because the people who do so assume they're legitimate. But it's the fact that the person who used it originally, how does that happen? That you put this together and it's just a photo from somewhere else. Did they just Google forest fire? I don't even understand.
Okay, last example. A photo set of 4 images was shared a number of times. One picture depicts a forest fire in California from 2013. The second picture depicts a fire in the Amazon, but dates back to 1989. A third dates back to at least 2018. The fourth is a digital map of South American fires representing the locations and frequencies of fire in the Amazon from 2000 to 2014. All right, so we can't believe many of the pictures that were making the rounds. But what about the Earth's lungs and 20% of the Earth's oxygen part? Forbes reached out to Dr. Dan Nepstad, a leading expert on the Amazon forest, and asked him about the lungs claim. His answer? It's bullshit.
Nice.
There is no science behind that. The Amazon produces a lot of oxygen, but it uses the same amount of oxygen through respiration, so it's a wash.
How dare it?
So this guy is saying, never mind 20%, essentially none of our oxygen comes from the Amazon rainforest. Can that be true?
Wow.
So the animals would use it? Well, you'll explain.
We'll get there. So several scientists have tried to estimate this. Yadvinder Mali, an ecosystem ecologist, wrote a recent blog post about this. He calculates that tropical forests are responsible for around 34% of photosynthesis on land. Based on its size, the Amazon would account for half of that. That would mean the Amazon generates around 16% of the oxygen produced on land. That percentage goes down to 9% when you take into account the oxygen produced by photoplankton in the ocean. Climate scientist Jonathan Foley pegs it at a more conservative estimate of 6% or less. But as Nepstad said, that's not the whole story, because trees also consume oxygen via cellular respiration, where they convert sugars into energy for growth using oxygen. Mali's research team estimates that trees use a little over half of the oxygen they produce. So now we're down to 4.5 or 3%, depending on whose estimates you use. But Mali says that oxygen is used up by the countless microbes which use oxygen to break down dead organic material in the forest. Mali says the net oxygen effect of the Amazon, or really any other biome, is essentially zero. In an article for The Conversation, Scott Denning, a professor of atmospheric science at Colorado State University, writes, "The often-repeated claim that the Amazon rainforest produces 20% of our planet's oxygen is based on a misunderstanding. In fact, nearly all of Earth's breathable oxygen originated in the oceans, and there is enough of it to last for millions of years. There are many reasons to be appalled by this year's Amazon fires, but depleting Earth's oxygen supply is not one of them."
Does that statement mean that if every plant on the surface and under the surface of the Earth died, we could continue to breathe for millions of years and probably die of other things, like not eating? But is that really what that statement is saying?
I was going to get into another part of this, and I'm not going to go too deep on it today because it probably warrants its own segment. But I was going to talk about a scientist and an Atlantic article talking about that scientist, where he paints a scenario where every living thing was burned. What if we combusted every living cell on Earth other than humans? And he wanted to calculate what would happen to the atmosphere if you burned down not just the Amazon, but every forest, every blade of grass, all the flowers, all the bees, all the orchids, all the hummingbirds, all the photoplankton. And he calculated that the concentration of oxygen in the atmosphere would drop from 20.9% to 20.4%.
No.
I look forward to this segment. Wow.
Essentially, I have it here, but his quote is, generations of humans would live out their lives breathing the air around them, probably struggling to find food, but not worried about where their next breath would come from.
Fascinating.
We'd do better than the dinosaurs did after that asteroid impact.
Well, now, depending on what that asteroid did, whether it created particulate matter or blocked out the sun and cooled things and stopped food, as Pat said, they'd be looking for food.
Yeah, the food. Yeah,
Interesting.
The big thing.
I think essentially his point in painting this sort of apocalyptic scenario is that in order to understand the concentration of oxygen in our atmosphere, you have to look at it on geological timescales.
Yeah, and I guess we don't properly appreciate the vastness, the size of the Earth, the thickness of the atmosphere.
Speak for yourself, Adam. Thank you. Don't want to insult some of our listeners.
I think there's a lot of large-scale things that I just cannot easily wrap my brain around, you know?
I do think the point he was trying to get across is this Gaia symbiotic relationship that we have with plants, where we breathe in oxygen and expel CO2, and they breathe quote unquote CO2 and expel oxygen, is simply incorrect, because you're not accounting for the sort of geological timescale that it requires to understand how the concentration of oxygen got into our atmosphere.
For show notes or to discuss this episode, visit our Facebook page and website at trcpodcast.com. For general inquiries or to send a topic or parody suggestion, email info@trcpodcast.com. Help support the show by leaving a review on iTunes and liking us on Facebook. Follow us on Twitter at TRC_podcast.
Outtakes.
So a while back, I don't know if you remember, you were in on this email. We got an email from Stuart from the Pseudo Astronomy podcast saying he had a 100th episode coming up and he wanted us to submit a commercial for him to play on his episode.
I remember this.
So Pat and I actually went ahead and made a commercial, and we thought maybe we can debut it right here for the Reality Check fans. So actually it has been on the Pseudo Astronomy podcast, but for the Reality Check listeners, here's our commercial, our first ever TRC commercial. Hello, Elon Dubrovsky here, local podcaster and science enthusiast. Are your podcasts spewing too much bunk all the time? Are your podcasts constantly making things up, driving you crazy? Are your podcasts full of shit? Think there's no answer? You're so stupid! There is! The Reality Check. Finally, there is a fun, skeptical Canadian podcast. The San Francisco Hospital study on
On paper quickly?
Origami.
Pat,
Come on, guys, let me just...
Can you make a reel of Elon's paper shuffling?
Yeah. Make it like...
That sounds amazing! Is your music player a computer, a phone, or an in-between? That doesn't matter, because we work on all platforms. The Reality Check. You'll be checked. So head on down to trcpodcast.com. That's the home of the Reality Check. Subscribe.
It's so stupid.